But yeah, welcome to the studio.
Yeah.
And welcome back home, I should say.
For a quick visit.
A little quick visit.
Yeah.
Well, I guess besides all of this stuff that you're doing with Caribbean Dragons, which I would love for you to kind of introduce a little bit further, but what brings you back?
It's just overdue. I can't usually go. It's usually like a 6-month thing.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't been back since Christmas.
Nice.
So it was just an opportunity to run away and come and warm up. Even though it's summer up there, but still.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I was thinking about my New York days in New York. Summers are disgustingly hot.
Yeah.
And you're in Canada, right?
Yeah, I'm in Toronto, yeah.
And I went to a couple of years of uni in a university in Montreal.
Okay.
At McGill.
At McGill.
And I distinctly remember, well, obviously how cold the winters are.
Right.
Minus 50 and minus 60 with wind chills. Like, why would anybody settle
How would you
in a place like this?
make this choice?
It's like, I would understand if you settled in like June of the year and then winter came and you're like, all right, we got to move south.
Yeah, undo this plan, yeah.
But they stayed. But and then I remember how hot the summers were, which is kind of contrasting and whatnot.
No, it wasn't a bad summer. But I just kind of miss home. It's been a wild year.
Yeah.
I just needed to kind of come and ground a little bit. Yeah.
So tell me about your, I guess, the more professional conversation, which is what you're doing with Caribbean Dragons and all of that stuff. I see you all everywhere on social media, like the stuff that y'all are doing, whether it be panels, and I think y'all did a pitch session once, not too long ago.
2 weeks ago, we were in Jamaica. Mm-hmm.
That's excellent. So it's more of a, I guess it's Caribbean Dragons, but how involved are you all outside of Trinidad? Because right now I know the Trinidad operation.
Yeah, so that was, I guess, in a way, our first kind of step out. Mark Prasad, as you know, in Bali, he's he's the one who is really good at, and it's in his domain, right? He's doing our kind of like engagements with folks and like trying to extend the network. And he's doing a solid job at that. And so we had gotten in touch with and been having some conversations with Caribbean Export Development Agency. That's right. And they, like in that particular one, we just had a conversation to kind of what's up. There wasn't any particular intent. And then they shared that they were going to do this pitch competition for founders. And I have a big peeve with the way pitch competitions are done. Just from, I generally have a big peeve with the whole kind of startup thing. So it's ironic that I'm with Caribbean Dragons, I have to say. But it's because of that. It's because of the peeve that I stepped in, right? And it's just so much fluff. I feel like, a lot of folks try to replicate the kind of Silicon Valley thing. I'm like, that's not real. Like, it's a 1 in 10% success rate of a company, even like moving forward past, I think, 3 years. So this like kind of getting caught up with the like sexiness, quote unquote, of it. And so when they said they were doing a pitch competition, I was like, here's what, please, can I just plan and design that pitch competition so that it actually has a purpose? And so, it was actually done kind of 80% as a coaching, mentoring session.
Nice.
And where we took them through 3 rounds of like feedback and pivoting, and then into their final round. So yeah, that's how come, then they invited us. And so we ended up being there for that. So that was neat. That was kind of our first big step out. The intent is to build out chapters across the Caribbean.
Right.
It's unfurling in a very interesting way. I think there was one intent when it kind of kicked off, when Mark and our previous co-founder kind of kicked it off. And then Mark and I randomly reconnected, and I was like, what are you up to? And he started to explain, and I remember half jokingly saying to him, I was like, you don't have a strategy, right? Like, you have a lot of intent, but there's no real strategy behind this. So why don't I gift you, a couple hours of time? I'm happy to work this through with you all. And we started, and then I ended up doing another session. And then eventually he's like, well, do you want to just come on board as a co-founder. And so then we've started to shape, but we've still been in this kind of dynamic space of still, it's core what we want. I think the core intent is still clear, right? Which not unlike, as you and I were chatting about, that there is this potentiality to rethink what businesses from the Caribbean look like.
Yeah.
And to have them situated not just in Trinidad, but actually be regional, be international. And that does not necessarily need to be only in the domain of like big established businesses, your Massey's of the world. Like why can't we be a little bit more audacious about small businesses having a bigger impact outside of Trinidad within the region? But there's a particular path to that that isn't really charted yet. We're these many years into the startup world being a thing, and certainly with the possible exception of Jamaica, but I want to say not even, there hasn't been a quote-unquote unicorn out of the Caribbean.
Out of the Caribbean, yeah.
Which is wild when you consider the resource base. And when you look at every other domain, sport, arts, culture, blah, 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 name it, you have several people from the Caribbean stepping up onto the world stage. Yeah. So it seems a miss, right? It seems a gap that we don't have this existing in that scale. Now we have businessmen, so you do have like Wes Hall from Jamaica. What's this other guy's name? Michael Chitley Chin from Jamaica, who are, we have our billionaires in Trinidad as well. But those tend to be very kind of like a businessman kind of a thing, as compared to here is innovative business that has actually kind of spread out, right?
And kind of overcome whatever barriers.
Correct. And I'm not a huge, I'm always a little bit, again, because I have a fair degree of skepticism and wariness towards the whole startup thing. And so even when we think of like, disruption, blah, 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 I'm like, what does that mean? Let's not get caught up in the sexes. Let's caught up on the actuality of it. And so we think of there's all this potential. It's obviously there. It's perhaps not quite latent. It's bubbling. But, the thesis which Mark had set up, which is a true thesis, and which is why the whole Caribbean Dragons thing came about, was ultimately, for any of these types of businesses to do well, you do need a critical mass. Whether that's of knowledge, a critical mass of resources, a critical mass of customers.
Yeah.
That does not exist within any one island, right?
That's a good point.
And so if we can find ways to overcome the geographical boundaries that exist and for us to genuinely operate as a single market in the way that, I guess CARICOM was intentioned to do. But
I was about to ask.
Probably still hasn't. But again, out of the domain of public sector and the governments, but like into private domain, like what does that look like? And so when I say we're hoping to extend up the candidates, that we're very close to it, I think, of like really proving out the model in Trinidad, to understand what's the actual and genuine value that we could bring. And that's really around this connection bit, right? And it sounds simple, and in a way it is, but what it takes to have that connection and to be able to, one, it's hard work. And kudos to Mark for having a really amazing job at like finding people to connect to and developing relationships with them and understanding not only what their needs are, but also what they can offer up. And so we're starting to hit that critical mass now where, the same way in our pre-conversation where you can say something random and be like, actually, I have a random person that you can talk to.
Yeah.
Maybe something will happen, maybe it won't.
Yeah.
That takes time, right? Because that's a lot of institutional knowledge building and it's relationship building. And the biggest thing, I suppose, in that is also there's a trust factor. And so I think that's one thing that we've been really thoughtful and careful about is, the kind of professional positioning of like, look, you're dealing with people who understand the space. Mark and I have very complementary but different skill sets. And so there's a rigor behind what we do, right? So there's not only a rigor in terms of the quality of connections and the way that the relationships are being built and the trust that people can put in us, but also, what I've been able to bring in is because I am that kind of academic, on that academic side, on innovation and what innovation actually means beyond the kind of sexy neon lights, and what does it take to build innovation ecosystems. And I've done work with in the Middle East, in Asia, like in terms of building innovation ecosystems and helping companies figure out, governments and companies figure out how to actually build and sustain systems. So there's we come with this kind of overall rigor and
a varying skill set,
and
a toolkit
sets.
kind
Correct.
of thing.
And so there is very little that people can ask that we won't be able to have a genuinely good answer for. Like, we're not just pulling stuff out, right? And some of the tensions we've had as we've gone through the last year and a half has been like me pulling away from, like, guys, let's not do the flashy version of this. Let's do the meaningful version of this. And it might seem very simple. It might not seem big and sexy. And I'm okay with that. If it's built on, is there a justification? Can we, prove up why the logic behind what this is doing, et cetera.
Real value, tangible.
Yeah, and so I think that's, I think we've started, like I said earlier, we're hitting this critical mass where there's a group of people who, and a relatively small group, but an invested group who understand what we're doing. We're now starting to put the tentacles out of the Caribbean. One of the biggest compliments that I think we had was we put out a role last week for a project manager. And we had several applications, but one young woman who I spoke with, I asked her, I'm like, how did you find out about this? Because she hadn't seemed to be like in this space at all, in the kind of startup, space. And she said somebody who did her MBA, they did their MBAs together. She reposted it. And she's like, well, if this woman has reposted it, it means this is a solid organization.
Right.
And I'm like, that's solid. That's a good place to be, right?
I like that
by
story.
proxy, you're getting this kind of brand recognition and not just a brand recognition, but the what's the right word? Like the impact and
It's like social
the
proof.
validation and social proofing of it. Yeah. So that was a great story. It's like, all right, cool. We're building this thing in the right way that it needs to be built. Yeah.
On what? So then, you mentioned something just now about the real way that innovation can, or meaningful innovation, not just the flashy, sexy side of innovation and the buzzwords, as they say.
Right.
I guess now, you want to go into your role specifically as it comes to innovation and some of the territories that you mentioned? Like how have you gotten involved in those jurisdictions, and what do you do for them in terms of innovation?
Okay.
Or planned for them?
Fair. I guess I'll start off with my teacher spiel. And that teacher spiel is, what's the difference between an invention and an innovation?
An invention and an innovation?
Yeah. How would you describe the difference?
An invention or an innovation. I think an invention feels like a newer idea or product or service, whereas innovation, I feel could be an existing system or product or service that maybe is done in a different way to create efficiencies. That's my...
And that would be a very solid answer. Well done, you. I'm impressed.
You heard it here first.
And the reality is most people will say that's the same thing.
Right.
So now this is where like some of the academic backing makes a difference, right? So anytime I'm engaging a group on this, the way that I describe it is an invention is something which is brand new.
Right.
Okay?
Simple enough.
Brand new. We've not seen it before. And innovation is something, so there are two factors that academically position something as an innovation. So one is that it is perceived as new in a situation or context.
Because of its impact or
So
relevance
it's
or
just a
whatever.
perception.
Right.
So it does not need to be net new to the world. It just needs to be perceived as new.
Right.
And the second one is that it is adopted at scale. And that's an important one.
Is there a time limit? No,
So
is there a time limit at which it is adopted at scale, or once it is adopted at scale, it can be considered an innovation?
well, so then this then sparks off. So no, there isn't a definition of it.
Right.
But it sparks off interesting conversations when you think of startups, right? Because when they talk about, well, what's our runway to commercialization, right? And so the idea is that if you're entering into the space of being an entrepreneur founder, you should have your eyes on both of these things. That what are you offering up to the market in terms of your product or service that can be perceived as differently than what's being offered up before?
Right.
And what's your pathway that people will actually use this thing to the point they adopt it at scale just simply means that commercialized bit, right? That it's self-sustaining, that it's commercially
At that point, yeah.
right? And this, of course, is innovation within a business context, needless to say. And so when you contextualize that in terms of what a lot of founders and a lot of the quote-unquote sexiness of it is, which I think is just a stupid model, is that you're getting all of these ridiculous investments to basically buy time until you can get that market up.
Right.
And I just think that's ass backwards. Now, it does not mean your market will always be there immediately, but it should not mean that you need a really long runway to have people understand and or convince them that this thing is right for them.
Right.
What it should mean is that as you develop your product in the early stages, and sure, you might start off with something in invention, and it's hard to understand. But at some point, you need to start coming up with these hypotheses of who's actually going to use this and why is it going to be valuable to them, and what's that. And of course, scale would look like different things depending on where. If you're doing something that's government, that's for like governments, let's say. Of course, scale, you could have one government and that's it.
Correct.
So there is subjectiveness in that. But this whole idea of you need to design this thing for a customer in mind. And so, one thing whenever I'm teaching this, I'll say, as somebody who comes in from innovation, I'm really upset by we need to find product market fit.
Right. Yeah.
And
I hear
find
that a lot.
And I find that preposterous because I think you actually need to find the flip. You need to find market product fit.
Right.
So it means, do I understand who my potential market is? And that can be a hypothesis in the early days, absolutely. But with an understanding of who that market is, what are their needs? When you get down into like the granularity of it, what are the functional needs? What are their emotional needs around this thing? What am I helping them do in their life that they aren't able to do right now? When you have that set up, then you can say, okay, I understand my market or my potential markets. What do variations, if you're in earlier stages, or what does it look like, my product or service? And I'm meeting that market need, not I'm going to develop this product and then go out into the world and try to find a market. No.
Because I have questions already. So
Yeah, so let me just say this, and I'm happy to. So I will say that I think historically, and I've not, this is more of opinion, like informed opinion than it is, kind of academically rigorous. But I will say an informed opinion is, I think this has changed from, if you look at kind of let's say the advent and upsurge in capitalism to where we are now. Okay. With that early upsurge in capitalism and the build of capitalism, we really were in a place where products and services were being developed that people had no need real for, and we created needs for them,
Yes.
right? And that's fair. I'm not discounting that the historical context of where things came from. But as we move forward, it's this recognition that yes, that's may certainly be true, but having an early hypothesis. So it's interesting. It's been a little bit while now, but I was doing quite a bit of advisory, on the side advisory to folks who were going through. I don't know if you've heard of the creative destruction labs that are. They started off at Rotman, where I
Nice.
have been based, and they've gone to several universities, and so they're these like high impact kind of accelerators where they're matching huge funding from industry with like PhDs, academic advisory, and all that stuff, right? And so they have these really interesting streams of like. I remember one company that I had chatted with was they were looking at waste collection in space. That's really out there, right? Like not like, oh, there's a crazy idea. It's like that's a real thing. There is so much debris flying around in space, and you have to find a way to collect it. And they're like, yeah, we're really early on in the technology of this. And I remember saying to them, like, that's fair. I'm not like absolutely. That said, who do you right now perceive that customer to be potentially?
Right.
Is it that you're going to go to governments to do this? Is it that there's going to be, some sort of environmental
space agency? Yeah.
Like, what is your hypothesis? And therefore, how does that change what you potentially design? Because you want to build that adaptability and flexibility now, because you have the benefit of having research funding to do that now. So so that to say, even with brand new ideas, with inventions, I think there's still space to kind of hypothesize of who could potentially use it and then use that in your design so that you don't get so far along to then be like, oh, here's a really cool thing, but we're not getting a market for it. Right? Which is where ultimately a lot of these companies fail because they ride so hard on investor funding trying to get to that point of market criticality, and then they just never reach it.
So then I'm now, I guess, because I mean, it seems pretty simple now that you've explained it, but I grasp the idea of you come up with a product to solve a perceived problem, and you build that product or the company, and you get served. That's the traditional way that I think of startups or whatever the case is. But you said something, it's like, well, why not figure out your market first and then develop a product around that need? How often in, say, pitch sessions or Caribbean Dragon stuff do you see that it goes that way from market to product?
Almost never.
Almost never. So then, but it makes sense, right, but it's not really practiced. Is it because, is there, I mean, I want to kind of introduce something here, curveball, but is it sort of, does it have anything to do with ego? It's like I came up with this idea, and so I want to force it into a particular hole. I mean, how do you see it, or how do you think that? Why do you think that we go one route as opposed to when there's clearly another route?
So I will be kind and say that ultimately, it's not really understanding that there is. It seems something that's very obvious. So, okay.
I didn't think of it until you said it. So
right.
I guess,
and then it's like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
Right? What's really fascinating is the grandfather, quote, or the father of innovation, Everett. His work came out of communication studies. Right?
Interesting.
And so you have like his theories on diffusion, technological diffusion, blah, 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 blah. Interesting space for it to originate from, right? Because you wouldn't at all think of it. So why I share that is it gives context to be like, look, some of this stuff is not obvious until it is.
Right.
Where I think the ego thing comes in, and I've seen it time and time again, is when you challenge folks and then they get abrasive and they get defensive. I'm like, well, go off. Mark and I have a running joke. Mark will say to any founder, I'm a bit offended by it, but whatever. Anytime we have a meeting with a new founder, and because he's usually the one who knows them first, and he'll introduce me, and like he'll be like, this is Andrew, blah blah blah, and he's known as a bit of an asshole, and I'm like, hey. And to be fair, it's because look, if I want their success,
right.
So what I'm not going to do is pander,
blow smoke up
and
their
be
ass.
like, oh, this is a great idea. No, I'll get straight to it. I'm like, look, I'm sure you've heard time and time again, how good you're doing and how great your pitch is, but I'm like, I don't see a clear need here.
Right.
I don't.
Inventing problems.
Yeah, exactly. So, and several times I've gone through conversations with folks and be like, look, I think there's actually an interesting pivot you could potentially do if you would be open to pivoting and then spending the time to validate or understand more fully this potential need.
So
right?
it's not that the need isn't there. It just may not be as clear to them, and therefore it doesn't appear clear to those that they're pitching
So
to.
I'll say.
That's some of the cases.
I'll refine your
Right.
statement just a little bit. It's not that the need isn't clear; it's that a need isn't clear.
Right. Okay.
So there might sometimes be a really obvious one that can be explored and, I hate this word, exploited.
Right.
But they just haven't necessarily thought about it yet, right?
Right.
So like we saw several of these when we were in Jamaica and helping with those pitches, is that, you had some really solid ones that were really thought on, well advanced. And then, I had to be careful about how I gave feedback because I was there in the role of facilitator and not as mentor. But I'd gently prod and be like, have you maybe considered
Right.
blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, again, coming back to my challenges with these kind of startup ecosystems is that there is a lot of like mutual masturbation that happens. And everybody gets excited and everybody's trying to, and it's like, guys, there's very little here.
It's not going to help.
These are sands of castles of sand, right? Yeah. So that's why, from a very kind of like personal, philosophical meaning, that's why I have engaged in the way that I have with this, because I think it's something that's not only the potentiality exists for the region, but the criticality of it. So energy, tourism, agriculture. Those are three mainstays, right?
Right.
All are volatile industries.
Yeah.
So what happens as weather, and they're also interlinked, right? So what happens to us as a Caribbean people when any and or all of those really start to go haywire? What do we fall back on?
Yeah, we suffer.
It's wild to me. I don't think I'm wrong on this, but there was a report done in the last few weeks that I think Guyana was the only country in the world that has a net surplus of food.
Well, food security is.
Right.
That's, people don't realize, if everything shut down, forget pandemic with things,
Right.
one or two things were still rolling around, these, deliveries and whatnot, but you have a total shutdown. In 2 weeks, Trinidad is out of food.
Crazy, right?
Out of food in 2 weeks.
Isn't that a wild thing?
People don't realize how, this is definitely a different conversation, but I do have a conversation with people a lot, even on this podcast, where talking about our food import bill.
Right.
And the fact that we import more tomatoes than we grow.
Right.
But we grow tomatoes locally. And how are the local farmers ever going to be able to compete if we allow
Right.
just not even the importation, the flooding of the market with foreign produce and whatever the case is? And I've always said, I've literally been called a Marxist, but I think that the industries that we have here, that we manufacture, we process, whatever the case is, should be protected. Mm-hmm. Because you want a farmer in Central to compete with the mega farms in the DR or in the United States or in Mexico. We're never going to be able to compete. So is it that we tell, okay, we'll fire for you, Mr. Farmer, we're going to import the tomatoes? That's a disaster waiting to happen. And so I'm for protecting local manufacturers, local farmers, whatever the case, whoever. If you make something, I think that you should be in some sort of protected capacity. And by protected, I don't mean you get incentives and you get tax. That's not even what I'm talking about. It's protecting by not either increased tariffs on importing of products that we manufacture here. If we don't manufacture it, we don't grow it, well, bring it in. But why are we competing with our local farmers? Different conversation, but I just wanted to bring it up.
I mean, if I open up my Pandora's box of thoughts around that whole thing,
you can pull this close if you want.
okay,
You can pull it up. It's super.
it's two things. I'll speak to them quickly, and we can dive into it.
Yeah.
This is where I get really frustrated by as a people, and this is a Trinidad specific thing, right? Our lack of historical context for ourselves. One, and as a subset of historical context, is imposed or evolved cultural nuances that we don't even understand.
Yeah.
We have not addressed our traumas. And I'm not a sociologist, but I'm pretty sure if this was tracked, I think, again, I think educated opinion. You had a country that went from, oh gosh, I'm going to get political. You had a country that went from the Johnny O'Halloran scandal to the 1970s Black Power movement to the 1990 coup. All of those had huge impacts on our cultural understanding of ourselves, or lack of. And it's just never been addressed. We have learned as a people that we can only be in it for ourselves.
Yeah, that's...
Right? We have learned that. We have learned that from our historical political leadership.
Yes, that's true.
Because we have been shown time and time again that there is a protected class, and I'm specifically saying a protected class. I'm not saying an economic class right? There is a protected class of people that can always act individualistically, and they will never be held accountable.
That's true.
And that protected class is a small class. So how do you expect the 95%, the 99%, the whatever percent, how do you expect the rest of the people to engage with the country beyond that point? By means of survival, you also have to act individualistically, right? So to your point of the tomatoes, how can you expect people not to care that they're just having to pay? They just want to pay the cheapest because
correct.
How else are they going to survive?
Yeah.
Right? There needs to be a degree of empathy for that. And so I'm always very careful to be like, look, several sides of a coin, right? These are very deep, our unaddressed past with agriculture.
Carony, etc.
Even beyond that, the unaddressed narratives and traumas that we have, and I'll speak, the predominant, ethnic groups.
Mm-hmm.
Two things can be true at once. And I think there are narratives that are held, both of which are true because a lived experience is a true experience.
Yes.
There is no objective reality when it comes to any of this. There's your lived experience. And until we address those things and understand, so this idea of like, look, who plants in Trinidad? I will not plant because that's for them people to plant, and all of these stupid narratives that come up. You know, I had a glimmer of hope in COVID when people were doing kind of like their box gardens at home.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, maybe this will finally, but then it went right back, right?
But convenience kills creativity.
Correct.
It's something that I came up with a long time ago. Convenience kills creativity. That was for my acting, but it's applicable.
Yeah. And so, you know, I mean, I'm peppering different things here. Like these are all huge sociological,
That's true,
cultural
yes.
things
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
again, you can't, it is easy to step back and be like, man, we should really be doing this. But then when you understand the nuances of it in our historical and cultural context, it's really hard to unwind.
Yeah.
And nobody is being brave enough to stand up and address it. And this frustrates me. Including myself. So, okay. There are these big systematic things that you can't necessarily get to. So you're working within those constraints, right? So, okay, maybe to bringing it back on the whole innovation startup-y thing, okay, maybe it is that people will always be driven by their individual purchasing power as compared to an adherence or an identification with a national pride.
Right.
So I will
Or an economic need.
Correct. So I will choose to buy the cheaper tomato, or in some cases I will choose to buy the aroma tomato because it gives me that feeling of superiority, because that's what it all boils down to.
Right. Yes.
Because when it's cut, I guarantee you that person will not be able to tell the difference between one and the other.
That's true.
So there are all these things interplaying, right?
Consumerism.
Yeah.
In that one example, yes.
Yeah, but it's the consumerism. It's not just pure consumerism. It's a consumerism that also is born out of these deep cultural beliefs or feelings of
inadequacy.
Correct. Right? So you can take this tomato thing and go down a whole path of mapping our people, right?
And just on that point, just a touch, I published my first book at the beginning of the year on consumerism specifically. Mm-hmm. And what I did was that I mapped 4 pillars of consumerism, or the 4 main pillars of consumerism, which I will say now, which is what relates to what you just said, and how they are used against us,
right,
if you will. And the 4 pillars is look good, look better, feel good, feel better, taste good, taste better.
Right.
And the number one exploited of them all, safety and security.
Right.
So we are sold those things and we buy them.
Right.
You know, and they're framed in certain ways, whether it's makeup for women, whether it's eating in one restaurant or the other, whether it's buying something expensive or cheap.
Right.
We make these decisions based off of, a million subjective talking points and touch points, but it's kind of that, we buy the more expensive thing because we think it's better.
Which, circling back.
Yes.
Back to the whole adoption at scale thing, right?
Yeah.
Their needs, those are not just functional needs. Those
Reasonable
are the
and unreasonable.
They're the emotional needs,
Which
right?
is, yeah.
Right? So anything within the luxury space.
Correct.
They do not follow the laws of economics, and then they just kind of been like, okay, well, we can't explain this, so we're just going to call it,
Luxury.
Yeah,
exclusive.
Yeah, and so your whole concept of an econ just goes to hell, which I'm a big fan of economics because it's very convenient up until the point where it can't be described, and then it's like, okay, that's an exception.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And the economists love that, but yeah.
So anyway, but they coming back to
innovation.
The innovation thing. It's okay. So if you can't get away from that, then how can we help our tomato farmers adopt technologies? And technologies do not necessarily only need to be, a new method of growing is a technology. A new plant food is a technology. It's not just an app. And so decide what a technology means. How can we help them employ new technologies to increase their yield, to increase the quality of their product, right? Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. To increase their distribution costs or lower their distribution costs. So these are where all these pockets exist. And we're not yet really
developing for those.
Correct.
What I would call, in this case, peripheral points, touch points, but are very much part of the system agriculturally speaking.
Okay. So then coming back, again, drawing a flow chart back to something you asked about in terms of what my work, and I kind of spoke a lot in that first bit about like this understanding of invention and innovation and all that stuff. Coming back to that, of some of the work that I've done, is you see successful governments, and I have worked with successful administrations in advisory roles where, they understand, look, an agricultural grant is an agricultural grant, whatever. Giving somebody money so they could buy more seeds versus investing in infrastructure.
I was about to say the system, yeah.
That can actually disrupt on a wider scale the way things are doing, the way that things are being done. That can actually lead, right, to some of the more incremental, bigger step changes and stuff.
Yeah.
So it takes these several different perspectives, and you have to kind of boil them down to all the ecosystem actors and say, okay, for you, what could we do here? For you, what we could do here? And then you start and that's how you build an innovation ecosystem, is that you break it down. I always like to use the analogy of Lego blocks. Get a set of Lego blocks and just start building. Because if you look to play with bricks, like big bricks, like you'll never get anywhere, right? And so how do we break this down into little tiny bite-sized pieces and start chipping away at those pieces, and then we level up and we level up and we level up. Especially for a place like Trinidad, the Caribbean region.
Right.
The structural systems, the cultural, historical, narratives, traumas, some of these things are way too difficult to overcome, and you cannot easily overcome them systematically and systemically. So you have to just go down to the moving bits,
Right.
and start chipping away at things like that. And then, critical mass, hopefully over time, and then it builds. So, okay, that was a lot of like soapboxing.
But I at the same time, I think that it's you're telling us what you do, but you're relating it to something tangible, whether it's agricultural, whether it's Trinidad wide, Caribbean wide. I think people need to understand more about what innovation is to be able to step out from behind the obstacles that seem sometimes and oftentimes seem too tall to even attempt. Mm-hmm. Where it's really not about that. It's, as you said, you start with something as small as Lego blocks, and you can kind of learn fundamentals, and then at some point, graduating to concrete blocks is a little bit more, is an easier step, rather than just going straight to build a house, as opposed to with with real blocks, as opposed to Legos.
Which, and this even comes on, I've used this example, right? When people are talking about, MVPs and building MVPs. Mm-hmm. And, I say, look, when you describe that, to me, that's like saying, I'm going to build a house and my MVP is when I put up all the concrete bricks.
The shell.
Yeah. And then, okay. You would never get that far.
Yeah.
Right? When it's your tangible money being used, you will never get that far. You go through several sketches. You go through, if you're working with an architect, they will go through different fidelities, from blueprints to maybe model scales, right? You have all these opportunities to see before, is this what the client wants?
Right, yeah.
And it allows you to change your mind. It allows you to be adaptable.
Yeah. Which part is the best execution direction?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so this idea that you can have several variations of fidelity before you reach an MVP. And we should. And so, I guess, in this innovation space, I guess this particular philosophy I come from is called design-driven innovation. And what that means is you're taking elements from design, like the design world, and you're applying them into business. Okay? And so one of those things is this idea of prototyping. So it starts off with the need identification, because that's what designers do. That's why Apple has been so successful at what it's done. Although not by training, Steve Jobs thought like a designer. He would spend hours and hours in different design shops to understand form and function and what that does emotionally for people and functionally for people, right? I'm not an Apple advocate or anything, by the way. I'll say that. But thinking like a designer, like I said, starts off with this understanding of a need. We are humans. We design for humans. Humans have a need. Let's understand those needs, and let's understand that those needs are functional and they're emotional. And most times, a purchase decision will be made on the emotional reason.
Yes. Most
times.
Yes. I have to send you my book.
Please do. But it's true.
Yeah.
Right? Because even convenience, right? Convenience comes down to this is the least frustrating path.
Yes.
Right? So it isn't. It ultimately is still an emotional decision, right?
Yeah. And one that has nothing to do with money.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Or less to do with money than.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that's where you start off. It's need identification. Then you go into hypothesizing. So, okay, I understand what these needs are. What might be the underlying drivers for these needs? That's what a designer does.
Right.
Right? So and you can call all of that kind of understanding and exploring the needs. And then when you do that and you start coming up with the ideas, you then go through this process of creative ideation and iteration. You keep iterating on it and getting feedback. That's what anybody who ever worked with an architect, that's what they do.
Right.
They give you a sketch. It's never the big sketch. They might give you this very abstract thing to sense. Is the shape kind of like?
Yeah.
And then you go through these.
I do like this arch.
Exactly.
I do like where this window is.
Yeah, and then you go through rounds and rounds of it. And so then in business, when we're doing our own businesses, how do we learn to prototype? I don't know if you know the McDonald's story of how the brothers who had come up.
Yeah, well, yes. Right. I just happen to know that particular
right,
one. If
right.
you call another example, I wouldn't have known it.
Okay, so they went, for those who are watching this that may not know, they took a tennis court and they taped out what a store would look like, what a kitchen would look like.
Yeah, where the fry machine was, where the
and
burger machine was.
They went through rounds and they lifted off the tape and they tried until they up. That is prototyping.
Because they realized when one person was walking to one machine, they were bouncing into somebody else. So they laid it out so that it would be efficient.
Which that's time. And that's, many rules of masking tape, right?
And it's not something that you would think of off the bat. I mean, you have to be a certain type of thinker to think of, when I open this restaurant and they're cooking the food, how efficient is the movement of the individuals cooking the food? I mean, that's not something that I don't think that a lot of people would necessarily think of off the bat. They would build it first, start to have all of these issues, and then say, okay, it's either too late to change or...
And this is a bit of backcasting on it, but using the two factors of innovation, right? A kitchen is a kitchen.
Yeah.
But it's perceived as new because the layout was different.
Right.
Because of the layout and because of the efficiency.
That was the innovation.
They got on the flip side, because McDonald's then came in at a different price point and the ability to turn stuff over faster. Right? Like you then got into like those formed the seeds for why you got the adoption at scale.
So it was a multi-layered innovation.
No, it wasn't because both things were true.
Right. So
part A on the kitchen redesign,
and then the price point,
then helped the price point, then helped their operations, then helped their scaling, which then helped get their customers. Right.
But the layout of their kitchen, funny enough, is not their main product. Whereas I probably would have went to how do we make the burger cheaper, or how do we who's our lettuce supplier, whatever the case is. Whereas the innovation came not from the product development, but from the infrastructure development,
the process development.
Process development.
And so when you look at the different types of innovation or the different types of underlying innovations, you get from service design, from process, from product, right? You have. There's up to 9 that depending on how, brand.
Right.
So this inquiry in of how do you adapt? How do you remain flexible in your development process, right? And then as you move towards the back end of this design innovation, so you start off with the need finding and like really understanding what do the humans need and what are the emotional drivers for this thing. Then as you go through the creative ideation process to come up with different options, and then you start testing those options and learn and do them in a very cost efficient, low fidelity way.
Right.
There's a great video again that I show when I'm teaching this stuff of like, it was one of the app development pitches for Sesame Street.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you're seeing kind of like the phone and like the characters going through and you're hearing the audio, right? Like, so then when I press on this thing, the character is going to change. And at the very end, you realize it's just a big cutout of the phone and there's an actor behind it. And you're like, dang, that caught me because actually I thought it was a digitized version that they had built. And no, they were just showing you how the process works and it took a piece of cardboard.
Fascinating.
So how do you break down and test some of your stuff, right? And so all of this is true for, you know, I think this is not even something in the domain of only entrepreneurs. We can all learn to do this, right? And we do it kind of, you know, every time we're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, we spend time thinking about how do we want to do that. That is prototyping, right? So these are practices when we try to understand, again, examples that I use, like, especially with folks who either have a partner or who have kids, you're constantly doing need finding. You're constantly trying to understand where they are. And you're constantly doing what we call sense making, which is you're using incomplete information to come up with a hypothesis of what's going on.
Right.
Right? So, you see your partner, parent, child, you just see them, they walk into the room and immediately like something is wrong. They haven't said a word, but you know something is wrong. That's a hypothesis. You've made sense of what you've gotten and passed data to make a judgment of what's happening right now. So that's a designer skill. And then the whole prototyping thing again. So these are all elements of what we do naturally. But again, to answer the question earlier on, why don't people think about it is these are things we do in practice in our lives, but we don't actually string it together into a process.
A lesson. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, into a defined path.
Right.
And ultimately, these are all like innovation management as a practice, as a discipline. That's what it's doing. It's trying to formalize and say, hey, follow this path. This will increase your likelihood of getting to a better outcome. And then kind of leveling back up to the whole like Caribbean Dragons thing. And that's what we're trying to do is saying, let's move out of the space of like sexiness and move into the space of how do we actually build for success.
Meaningful tangibility.
Correct. Yeah, so that's what that work is looking like.
That's awesome. I really I knew I was going to enjoy this conversation, but I've actually learned quite a bit. Not just about what you do, I'm not talking about that, about just for my own self. I mean, I consider myself a innovator,
right.
In the things that I do, and we've launched a couple products that are definitely innovations.
Right.
And it kind of takes me to the filmmaking side. I mean, I have a 15-minute short film that we're getting ready to go to production on this week. And I looked at it this morning and I realized that I've reached version 7 of the edit. It's 15 pages and I've already had 7 iterations of it.
Right.
And it's kind of like I was doing it, not realizing what I was doing. I was just simply editing the screenplay. But what it really is, it's really iterations to get to a product that I think will have a market fit, if you will.
Right.
And I know that's, there's two sides what you said. There was that way, and then there was going the market and then trying to figure out a product for that market. And I kind of do that. I try to do that with the film as best as I can. Like, what haven't we seen locally or Caribbean-wide? What could be commercialized locally in the Caribbean? And similarly with product placement, people write a film and they will try to fit a product into it, whereas I chose a product and developed a film around it. Right. So I guess it's just innovation is kind of just looking at the world just a little differently.
It is.
Maybe not innovation, but just that mindset of...
Look,
designer mindset, I think you call
One
it.
thing I'll say that you're probably doing without realizing it, and there are good stories to share on this. There are 3 stories in this piece that I'll share. One thing that you're probably doing in your editing is recognizing where an audience would emotionally connect to this piece. And I'm going to hypothesize that that's likely your editing is that's what you're doing without realizing that you're doing it. And there are 3 stories that I think that are within that domain. So one, I don't know if you've ever seen Money Heist.
Yes. Yes.
Have you ever watched the behind the scenes special?
I have not.
Fascinating. I think you would enjoy it because the writers and directors talk about how much time they spent on even before what you saw just on the emotional anchoring from all those characters that went into that development, because that's why people got hooked onto it.
Right.
It was less a story. It was this identification with these characters that you either frustrated you or excited you. And that's why they had a successful run.
Right.
Interesting thing to watch.
That is.
Sometimes things are born out of necessity, and I think it's interesting to see where it goes. White Lotus. Do you know the story? Have you seen White Lotus?
I haven't seen it, but I know
You know of it?
Sean Baker and the actor and actresses and whatnot. But
Okay, so what's interesting about White Lotus is COVID hit, and the writer, I forget his name, was like, how do we get about this?
oh no, that was Honora. Sorry, Sean
Okay.
Baker's Honora. My apologies. Yeah,
That's okay.
White Lotus.
But White Lotus, and so it was like, if we're in COVID, maybe we can just do a single shot location, have everybody locked down for several weeks. And that's how the idea of White Lotus and that idea of filming the entire thing within a hotel happened. It was born out of this like constraint of COVID.
right.
Now, why I say it's interesting to see what happens is as they go along seasons, whether or not that's a replicable formula is the question mark, right?
Right.
The other interesting thing then, and as you and I were talking earlier about like zombie films, I'm fascinated to see what happens in the next season of The Last of Us.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that you followed that.
I
at all.
did.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, when the thing happens in this last season, as early as it happens, and people just lost it, right?
Yeah.
And
Viewership dropped.
viewership pummeled.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're able to bring that back, although that's original to the
Correct. That's canon.
to the source material, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you think, well, you have a decision there to make, right? Now, whether or not, I don't know whether or not they sat down at I don't know. I would hope that they sat down and be like, guys, we understand we're looking at a 70% drop off on viewership, right? If we do this. But you've done so good at connecting your audience to one thing
That's the problem.
that's the problem. So what is done really well is also the problem, right? So coming back to your point, it's like, look, ultimately, even in your editing, I'm guessing that's what you're doing, is that you're sensing of which of these things will resonate. And so, even in the product placement stuff, like if there's a nostalgia behind this thing,
Yeah.
that's likely going to float it, right? And even to use your own thing, right? It's what are your 4 pillars again?
Look good, look better, feel
Right.
good, feel better, taste good, taste better, and safety and security.
Right. So, which ones do your script hit? I'm sure you can go in and map it and be like, this is what it's hitting.
Yeah.
Humans are archetypal. People love to believe, we're so complex. We're archetypal. So the things that you're either almost always acting, whether we call it fear and love, whether you call it, sadness and happiness, there's these dualities. We're always existing in these dualities, right? And you just figure out which space you're playing in. And is it manipulative? No, that's your job in terms of whatever your job, if you're producing, whether it's a product, service, movie, whatever, your job is to make sure that this thing sells.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just being an artist, which is fine. And if you're just being a big A or big C creative or a big A artist just for the heck of it, great. But if you're in any space of business or commerce, your job is to make sure that this thing gets an audience, whether a paying audience or not. And so how do you? That's your job to figure out how you emotionally connecting to it, right?
That's true. I think in the case of Last of Us with the viewership drop, I think it shows that who is watching the series is not who played the game.
Correct.
So where the source material mattered to a small segment of the viewership of the TV show.
And, do I think there were different ways I mean, that's a big spoiler alert, but do I think there were different ways for them to have done this to not shock as much? Absolutely. I think there was a bit of carelessness. I enjoyed it. I thought it was wild. I loved having that experience. But as you know, I'm also somebody who comes from theater and directing. And so I'm like, look, I'm happy for you to take me to whatever. I'm along for the ride. I'm not be held to anything, right?
Yeah.
But the average viewer is not like that. And so there's also this duty of care of okay, how do I...
Thinking about the audience at the same time.
How do I make sure... What do I hint at maybe earlier?
Foreshadowing, get people ready.
Correct.
It makes the emotional crash a little bit easier to deal.
Yeah. I mean, you can think of even if there was at the very start of season 1 or season 2, there was a moment of a morning that kind of said, hey, by the way, this is going to happen. I'm not going to tell you when it's happened, but
It may have saved the viewers.
You haven't saved it, right? Because people know, I'm just waiting
coming.
for it to happen. I'm just waiting for it to happen. And
as opposed to being crushed emotionally.
it was rough.
Yeah.
It was rough. That was a very rough thing to do to an audience in the way that was done.
You think they were taking a page from Game of Thrones?
I can't speak to that because I've never seen Game.
I never seen Game of Thrones either, but I just know that
I know
it was
that people
very
have said-
emotional.
I know people have said, but again, from my understanding of that conversation was, in that case, nobody was fair game,
Right.
and you knew that early on.
Right.
So
that's true. That's a good point.
So you're on the ride. You're not emotionally
it
attached.
was yes, it's a different emotional ride to Last of Us. Yes,
And
I agree.
so, they I guess come back into, for me, it is both an exciting and difficult thing to introduce as I have said, to introduce emotion into the boardroom. Because people don't respond well to it, right?
Or they don't respond well, or it's the response is unpredictable.
They don't respond. My experience is they don't respond well.
Got it.
Because the default is then we have been accustomed to doing business in a certain way. And who has time for that stuff? It's like, well, you should.
Right.
It's a lack of understanding of your stakeholders, customers, is probably the biggest driver of things failing. And so that's true for anything that you do, whether you're service line worker or whether you're a CEO. Like the minute you get into yourself and you start centering on what am I doing in my own greatness, and you lose sight of we are always serving somebody else. And what does that person need? And how do I serve that need in the best way that I can? When you lose sight of that, things fall apart. Or they never get started. And so, this is a full circle on that conversation of that's what we're trying to do with Caribbean Dragons, is instill a new form of consciousness around the way that businesses are being developed.
Right. That's a smart way to put it. I like that.
And in the process of doing that, then connecting people with the right resources to allow them to do that as well. So it's interesting work. It's potentially meaningful.
And it brings you back home every once in a while.
It brings me back home every while. It keeps me up. But yeah, they to see it take form is really heartwarming.
I could see it being fulfilling and satisfying.
Yeah.
It's from where I'm sitting, it feels, I can feel the want for genuine change just from this conversation. And so even for me, it's like there's like a point of finally, somebody or a group is doing something that has lasted the test of time. We hear about things pop up all the time and
Yeah.
they don't really last, which is, I mean, that's just how it works. But I mean, obviously it makes me feel good because I do have a desire to, if not directly, I want to see us develop.
It's in all our interest, right?
Yeah, whether it's agriculture, whether it's small businesses, like you said, no Caribbean unicorn has really shown itself. There may be one or two that could be considered. But yeah, I think that anything that kind of changes and enhances the landscape that can make that easier to happen or more likely to happen or give people the tools that they need so that it can happen. I mean, at the end of the day, that's invaluable in my opinion.
And that's my plug, Stephen, for our big conference that's coming up.
Oh, lovely. When is it?
October 13th to the 15th.
Excellent. Right here in Trinidad?
Right here in Trinidad.
Excellent. Good
And
choice.
So, again, purposeful design. So we've designed it into 3 days. And so if anybody catches this and you're interested. So day one, we're calling it the Investor Day. And what we're doing is a mixture of like knowledge share. And so we have Professor Laurel Steinfeld coming in from Ivy Business School. And the conversation there is, again, partly in part developed together, is that it's really difficult to mobilize capital within the Caribbean for entrepreneurs. And it's difficult to mobilize capital, one, because there are trust issues, risk exposure issues, people aren't accustomed investing, mechanisms, trying to get a bank account set up in Trinidad is almost impossible, sending money from overseas, yada, 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 yada. So you have all of this capital that sits globally in the diaspora, and it's really hard for that capital, even though they might have intent to put it into the Caribbean to help fund businesses. Doing that is impossible. And so that day, we're kind of split into 2 parts, where one part is around what are some of the things that people are using successfully, and then the second half of the day is us sitting down as a think tank to be like, okay, how can we design fit-for-purpose investment vehicles for our region? So that's one thing. Our second day is really focused on the entrepreneurs and founders bit. And so we're really excited. We have Marcus Dantos coming in. He was the founder of Startup Mexico, one of their Shark Tank Mexico funders, like big deal. But he's one of the builders of the Mexican ecosystem. So he's coming in, a lineup of great speakers, and then just in terms of the general sensibility and understanding, but also what's interesting is that we're doing these 5 focused discussions on fintech, health tech, agri-tech, climate tech, and the orange economy. And that's our hypothesis on the 5 streams that the region can really build on. So businesses within those 5 streams, there's a sense of understanding, contextual lived experience understanding. So those are 5 kind of focus areas then that we are proposing that we really should be focusing efforts on. And so that day, again, is a mix of like knowledge on the general space, but then here's what these streams can potentially look like. And then day 3, I call it next gen, but we turn to high school students to bring them into this understanding of what does innovation foundering look like as compared to just plain entrepreneurship, which for us in Trinidad especially tends to look like I'm going to open a store, I'm going to open a food business, I'm going to open whatever retail.
Yes.
So how do we start inspiring and being like, guys, there's so much more.
Broaden the horizons.
Interesting things that you can think about. And so again, 3 focus groups, different needs, and how do we build on it? So that's
October, give us the dates again.
October 13th to 15th.
13th, 14th, and 15th.
Yeah.
And where can people find more information or more tickets?
So just like anywhere in Caribbean Dragons, you either go to our LinkedIn page or to Instagram or our website. And
is it CaribbeanDragons.org? CaribbeanDragons.org.
CaribbeanDragons.org. Or just look us up on LinkedIn and or Instagram. And yeah, the way that it's set up is the Investor Day is by invitation. So if you're interested in, you can always send in. It's ticketed for the second day. So tickets are 1,000 TT, 150 US. It includes an opening night reception, full day of programming, lunch, breakfast, and then a closing reception. And then, well, the student day is
The third day is a student day.
Yeah.
You're working with the ministry or how?
Trying to.
Got
Trying
it.
to.
Good.
We're plugging ahead, right? Like the work has to be done. So we're finding ways to bootstrap
To make it happen.
and make it happen.
Phenomenal. Well, I look forward to having you back after this because now I know we have to schedule you for after this, for after that conference.
Absolutely. And anything else.
You have to let me know when you're back.
I will.
Thank you
It's
so much for
great.
coming.
Thank
I
you.
really
Thank you
enjoyed
for
this
the
conversation.
invitation. I did too.
It almost makes you like conversations like these, or when you hear like you speak about, what is innovation, and it's innovation is just something that we think is innovation. It's innovative, it's new, it's cool, it's better, whatever the case is. But there's so much more
Yeah, so much more.
to just the word innovation and how it fits
And
in.
that's why there's a lot of, we speak of innovation theater. I don't know if you ever heard this expression.
No.
Innovation theater is exactly what it sounds like. There's a bunch of stuff happening, but not really a lot is happening.
Right.
It's a lot of performance.
Yes.
And
I
that's
think
why, because there's not an understanding of.
that's just it. I think at the end of the day, when people really say, I never thought, that's one of my favorite things to hear somebody say. I never thought of it that way.
Right.
Because you literally, it's like you're seeing somebody or experiencing somebody experience another perspective.
Right.
And I think that's just a beautiful thing, especially when it comes to developing us, socially and culturally, economically, for whatever it is. It's a nice thing. So thank you so much for coming
Amazing.
on.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, man.
All right. Take care.
Excellent.